You are listening on Velvet Audio Stories, a brain-hacking IQ test.
Yellow lights of the damp stone basement cast long, distorted shadows that danced against the moldy walls like cavorting demons. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the money counter was the only sound breaking the deathly silence, until Ivan, the rival boss, burst into a coarse, gravelly laugh that reeked of cigarettes and triumph. "Look at you, Adrian Volkov, the monster of this city, brought to his knees by a woman. $50 million, is that all you're worth to her?" Adrian sat there, chained to a heavy steel chair. His body was motionless, his muscles frozen by the paralytic Lena had injected into his neck 10 minutes prior. Yet, those ash-gray eyes held not a single flicker of fear. He looked at Ivan, then shifted his gaze to Lena, the woman calmly packing the last stacks of bills into a suitcase. "You're wrong, Ivan," Adrian rasped, his voice deep and weighted with the gravity of a sovereign. "She didn't sell me for the money. She's selling you to the Reaper. You're just too stupid to realize it." The money counter abruptly cut out. Lena slammed the suitcase shut, the sound echoing with the hollow finality of a hammer hitting a coffin. She slowly peeled off her medical gloves and approached Ivan. Her stilettos struck the stone floor in a rhythmic, terrifying cadence. Click, click, click. "The money is accounted for, Ivan," Lena said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as cold as a scalpel drawn from a freezer. "But I have a complimentary gift for you. Do you know why I injected Adrian with a paralytic?" Ivan frowned, the barrel of the gun in his hand trembling slightly. "To keep him from killing you while you run with the cash?" "No." Lena stopped directly in front of the muzzle, using a slender finger to brush it aside as if it were a piece of junk. She leaned down and retrieved a gleaming scalpel from a stainless steel tray. "I injected him so he wouldn't feel the pain. When I do this to you." Under the flickering light, the blade in Lena's hand glinted with a cold spark. She continued to whisper, her voice sweet as bitter honey. "Adrian cannot feel physical pain, but you can, can't you, Ivan? That celebratory drink I gave you earlier, it wasn't poison. It was a catalyst that makes every sensory nerve in your body 10 times more sensitive than normal. A stray hair brushing against your skin right now would feel like being flayed alive." Ivan's face turned from flushed red to a deathly pale. He stumbled back, breath hitching, sweat pouring off him in drenching waves. He wanted to pull the trigger, but his fingers no longer seemed to obey. Lena stepped forward, pressing the blade against the back of his hand. With just a feather-light touch, before the blood could even bead, Ivan let out a scream that tore through the night. It wasn't a human sound, it was the sound of a soul being ripped apart. "Don't scream," Lena shushed him, her eyes glowing with a strange, dark exhilaration. "Adrian prefers silence when he watches me work. Darling, what do you think of my technique?" In the shadows, a predatory, twisted smile spread across Adrian's face. He watched his woman, the doctor who once swore to save lives, now calmly torturing his enemy with the precision of a genius. He realized then that he didn't just own a doll. He had fostered a version of himself even more ruthless than the original. "Perfect, Lena," Adrian whispered, his eyes burning with a delirious adoration. "You're driving me absolutely mad." Lena looked deep into his eyes. In that moment, the boundaries between right and wrong, between healer and criminal, ceased to exist. There were only two warped souls finding harmony in cruelty. She knew that from this second on, the underworld didn't just have a king. It had a queen who held the Reaper's blade. Chapter 1. A Compact with the Reaper. The rusty tang of blood mingling with the damp mold of the abandoned waterfront warehouse created a gruesome stench, enough to make any ordinary person retch instantly. But Lena Hayes was not an ordinary person. She knelt on the cold cement floor, her blue medical latex gloves reflecting the dim glow of a flashlight, her hands, once used to save lives, now calmly checking the concentration of sulfuric acid in large plastic canisters. 5 minutes more, and this body will be nothing but anonymous sludge. No bones, no fingerprints, no DNA. Lena's voice was steady and clinical, as if she were reporting a routine surgical procedure in a hospital. 3 paces away, Adrian Volkov stood silent in the darkness. His expensive black dress shirt was stained with a few streaks of dried blood, yet his face held an eerily relaxed expression. He stared at Lena's back, his ash-gray eyes narrowing in contemplation. He had hired many professional cleaners, but he had never seen anyone face a decomposing corpse with the deadly composure of this de-licensed doctor. "Do you feel nothing, Lena?" Adrian spoke, his voice deep and echoing in the hollow space. He was a human being once. A man with a family, with sins, and now he's just a chemical experiment in your hands. Lena stood up, removing her surgical mask to reveal a delicate but weary face. She looked directly into his eyes, without a hint of avoidance. "To me, he became a corpse the moment you pulled the trigger. I don't waste emotion on things without a heartbeat. I only care about fulfilling the agreement. I scrub your floors, and you ensure the FBI never finds me." Adrian's lips quirked, a rare, chilling smile. He stepped closer, closing the distance until Lena could smell the expensive tobacco and the scent of danger radiating from him. He hooked a long, rough finger under her chin, forcing her to meet the burning possessiveness in his gaze. "You're colder than I thought, Doctor. A dead soul in a beautiful body," he whispered, his hot breath fanning across her face. "But I didn't hire you just to clean the floors. I have another job, something only your cursed, brilliant hands can do." Lena's brow furrowed, a chill running down her spine as she realized Adrian wasn't looking at her as a woman, but as the perfect instrument for some maddening scheme. "I'm a doctor, not an assassin," she hissed. "Oh, I don't need you to kill anyone." Adrian released her chin, turning to walk toward the sleek black Rolls-Royce waiting outside the warehouse doors. "I need you to treat a monster who knows no pain. Let's go, Lena. Welcome to my estate. Tonight, your life as a doctor officially ends, and your bargain with the devil begins." Lena looked at the body dissolving in the chemical vat, then at Adrian's broad back. She knew that once she stepped into that car, she could never return to the world of light again. Chapter 2. The Senseless Machine. Adrian Volkov's estate was not a lavish, glittering castle. It was a fortress of glass and gray steel, cold and brooding atop a hill. Inside, everything was brutally minimalist, much like the mind of its master. Lena sat across from Adrian in his expansive study. The harsh white fluorescent light beat down on her face, accentuating her delicate yet resolute features. She did not look around the room with the awe or terror of the women usually brought here. Instead, she stared intently at Adrian. Her gaze swept across his broad shoulders, lingered on the faint scars tracing his neck, and finally locked onto those bottomless ash-gray eyes. "What are you doing?" Adrian broke the silence. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers interlaced upon the desk. "You should be trembling, or at the very least, begging me to let you go." "I am observing," Lena replied, her voice as flat as a windless lake. "You don't blink in a normal cycle. Your breathing is too steady, even after stepping away from a murder. And the way you move, it lacks the natural reflex to minor environmental stimuli." She stood up, slowly rounding the desk to approach him. Adrian did not stop her. He was curious to see what this woman intended to do. Lena stopped right beside him. Without hesitation, she reached out and touched the back of his hand, where a long shard of glass from the earlier brawl had sliced a deep gash. Blood was still seeping out, but Adrian hadn't even bothered to glance at it. "You don't feel it, do you?" she asked, her finger pressing firmly directly into the open wound. Adrian's expression remained stoic, but his pupils constricted slightly. Not from pain, but from her sheer audacity. "Pain is a luxury I do not possess." Lena looked at him, a gaze full of professional scrutiny and seasoned irony. "You aren't a god, Adrian. You're a patient. In my eyes, you aren't the powerful mafia don who terrifies this city. You're just a psychological and biological tumor in need of surgery." He let out a short, dry laugh that echoed through the empty room. He stood abruptly, pinning her against the edge of the desk, his powerful arms locking her in on both sides. They were so close she could smell the scent of blood and old-growth forest radiating from him. "A tumor?" he growled, his voice so low it vibrated through his chest. "Many have tried to cut me out, Lena. They all ended up in graves. You think you're sharp enough to touch me?" Lena did not flinch. She looked up at him, her eyes burning with a defiant light. "I don't use a gun to excise you. I use knowledge. You brought me here because you crave the sensation you've lost. You want to hurt, you want to love, you want to feel alive." She raised her hand, placing her palm over his heart, feeling the strong but monotonous thud behind his shirt. "I won't fear you, Adrian. Because you cannot kill the only person capable of making you hurt. And that is your true imprisonment. Adrian looked down at the small but fierce woman before him. For the first time in his life, he felt a strange surge of electricity shoot down his spine. It wasn't pain, but it was far more intense. He realized he hadn't just hired a doctor to clean up corpses. He had brought home someone who dared to dissect the very depths of his soul. Chapter 3. The Devil's Bargain. The air in the study grew thick. Adrian remained there, trapping Lena between his arms like iron pincers, yet he did not strike. He was watching her with a piercing gaze, as if trying to discern whether this woman's fortitude was genuine or merely a meticulously crafted mask. He released her, taking a step back before strolling slowly toward a bar made of black marble. The sound of ice cubes clinking against the glass was sharp and clear. "Do you know why I don't feel pain, Lena?" he asked, his back still turned to her. "Many say it is a gift from God for a killer. To know no pain means to know no fear." "It's not a gift," Lena corrected, smoothing the lapels of her worn white lab coat. "In medicine, it's a rare genetic disorder, congenital insensitivity to pain, CIP. But your case isn't just physical. You've frozen your entire emotional system to survive. You don't feel pain, so you don't feel joy, exhilaration, or anything that makes a person feel alive." Adrian turned around, an amber glass of liquor in his hand. He took a sip, his ash-gray eyes locking onto her. "Brilliant. That's why I chose you." He set the glass down and pulled out a thick dossier. "The FBI is hunting you for illegal gene experiments in Boston. They call you the Mad Doctor. But I call it a breakthrough. I want you to continue those experiments, on my own body." Lena froze. She stepped forward, flipping open the dossier. They were her unfinished studies on restructuring sensory neurons, the very thing that had cost her career and reputation. "You're insane," she whispered. "This has never been tested on a living human. It could destroy your nervous system, leave you paralyzed, or worse, brain dead." "Death doesn't scare me, Lena. Emptiness does." Adrian stepped toward her, standing close enough for her to see the fractures in his composure. "I want to know what it's like to feel the blood rushing through my veins. I want to know why people cry, why they tremble when they are touched." He held out his hand, a large palm with rough knuckles. "Name your price, doctor. I give you the most advanced laboratory in the world, absolute protection from the law, and an unlimited budget. In return, you make me hurt. You make me human, at any cost." Lena looked at the hand extended before her. This wasn't a job offer, it was an invitation into the abyss. If she agreed, she would become an accomplice to a monster. But if she refused, she would forever be a fugitive, clutching the brilliant knowledge cursed by the world. She looked into Adrian's eyes, a wasteland longing for rain. She saw herself in them, an outcast, a soul obsessed with pushing the boundaries of nature. Lena didn't shake his hand. Instead, she pulled a small syringe from her pocket and drew a blood sample from the still seeping wound on Adrian's hand before he could react. "I don't promise to make you a good man, Adrian," she said coldly as she tucked the sample into a vial. "I only promise to make you feel so much pain that you'll wish you never met me." "Is that what you want?" Adrian flashed a dark, satisfied smile. "Exactly what I need." Chapter 4. The Sterile Laboratory. Lena followed Adrian into the basement of the estate. In stark contrast to the classical elegance above, the space below was a state-of-the-art medical complex illuminated by a cold, blinding white light. The hum of the air filtration system created a monotonous, deathly rhythm. Adrian stood in the center of the room, unstrapping his expensive watch and placing it on a metal table. He began to shed his dress shirt, revealing a powerful physique crisscrossed with nameless scars, testaments to a man who had been stabbed and shot without so much as a blink. "What are you standing there for? Get started," Adrian said, his voice echoing in the hollow room. Lena opened her equipment case, the metallic clatter sharp and ringing. "You think this is a game? I need to check basic neural responses before I even touch your genetic code." She stepped closer, gripping a long acupuncture needle. Adrian sat on the examination bed, watching her with indifference. "Be my guest. Prick me wherever you like." Lena drove the needle deep into his bicep. Not a single flinch. She proceeded to drive it into his side, one of the most sensitive areas of the human body. Still, there was absolute silence. "See?" Adrian leaned down, his face inches from hers, his breath carrying the faint scent of strong wine. I'm a machine, Lena. A broken machine. You're wrong, Lena hissed, pulling the needle out, her eyes flashing with irritation. You aren't broken. You're just a coward who has locked every sensory door to avoid facing reality. Adrian narrowed his eyes, a glint of danger surfacing. A coward? You're the first person to dare use that word with me and still keep your tongue intact. Because it's the truth. Lena stepped forward, forcing him back against the bed. You enjoy not knowing pain because it makes you invincible in the underworld. But you're terrified to feel, because feeling means you have a weakness. You hired me to make you hurt, but are you prepared to be weak? Adrian let out a low, guttural laugh. He suddenly caught her wrist, pulling her hard against his solid chest. Weakness? You think letting a woman hold a scalpel over my body is weakness? Let me go, Adrian. You're wasting my time. Answer me, doctor. He tightened his grip, his ash-gray eyes locking onto hers. Why are you so obsessed with this? Why would a genius like you agree to dip her hands in blood just to study pain? Lena looked straight at him, her smile carrying the bitter tang of the past. Because I want to know what my father felt when he died in that fire without being able to call for help. I want to know if he suffered the way they say people do, or if he was just like you, empty. Adrian's grip loosened slightly. A long moment of silence stretched between them. For the first time, he saw a fracture in her icy exterior. So we are the same, Adrian whispered, his thumb instinctively brushing against the frantic pulse in her wrist. Two lunatics haunted by the things we've lost. We are nothing alike. Lena snapped her hand away, reaching for the blood vial from earlier. You chose the darkness. I was chosen by it. Now, lie down. I'm going to administer the first test dose. And a fair warning. If it works, it's going to feel like 1,000 fire ants are burning through your spinal cord. Adrian lay back, his eyes never leaving hers. Burn me then, Lena. I've been waiting to catch fire. Chapter 5. Touch me again. The sharp click of the syringe plunger echoed hollowly in the sterile space. Lena pushed a small bead of air from the needle, her gaze intensely focused, completely ignoring the oppressive presence of the man lying on the surgical table. I'm injecting directly into the nerve ganglion near the spine. If you experience any symptoms of seizing or difficulty breathing, signal me with your eyes. Adrian didn't respond. He simply lay there, one arm draped over his head, as nonchalant as if he were waiting for a cocktail rather than a dose of chemicals that could shatter his nervous system. As the cold needle pierced through his skin, Lena felt the unyielding firmness of his roping muscles. She had to apply more pressure than usual. The fluid was pumped in. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Adrian suddenly let out a long, ragged exhale. Those ash-gray eyes, usually as still as a frozen lake, abruptly fractured. The veins in his neck surged, and beads of sweat began to break across his forehead. Adrian? Lena leaned in low, her hand instinctively gripping his shoulder to keep him steady. It's coming, Adrian growled through clenched teeth. He suddenly snatched the hand resting on his shoulder, squeezing so hard Lena thought her bones might snap. But she didn't pull away. She saw the chaos in his eyes, the turmoil of a man facing, for the first time in decades, a sensation spiraling out of control. Does it hurt? She whispered, her voice trembling slightly with a scientist's raw curiosity. Not enough, Adrian muttered, his voice thick with a dark exhilaration. He yanked her hand down, pressing her palm flat against his violently heaving chest. Touch me again, Lena. Harder. Lena froze. Her eyes locked onto his, and she realized something terrifying. The drug hadn't just awakened his pain receptors. It was rousing the primal cravings buried in the dark. The physical contact between their skin now carried a staggering weight. She could feel his chaotic heartbeat thrumming through her palm. You're having an emotional anaphylactic shock, Adrian. Let go. I need to check your pupils. Don't go, he rasped, a command laced with a plea he didn't even recognize. He used his other hand to cup the back of her neck, pulling her so close their noses brushed. You promised to make me feel, and now I feel an entire hellfire burning in my chest. The distance between them was now measured in millimeters. The physical tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Lena felt her breath mingling with his. The repulsion between a doctor and a killer was suddenly blurred by a naked, possessive instinct. "This isn't medical pain, Adrian," she said, her breath hitching. "This is madness." "Then go mad with me," Adrian whispered against her lips, his eyes burning with a light Lena had never seen before. He didn't kiss her. He simply held her there, in an agonizing proximity, savoring every frantic beat of her heart beneath his palm. A peak confrontation between control and collapse. Chapter 6. Rules of the Devil. After the harrowing night in the laboratory, the atmosphere between Adrian and Lena was no longer the icy confrontation of two strangers. It had morphed into a simmering electric field, threatening to detonate whenever they occupied the same space. The next morning, Lena was jolted awake by a sharp knock at the door. A servant placed a black velvet box in her room. Inside lay a silk dress the color of vintage wine, accompanied by a note containing only 3 words, "Dinner." First floor. When she descended the staircase, Adrian was already waiting. He was no longer in a lab coat or surgical scrubs, but looked sophisticated in a custom-tailored suit that completely masked his scars, and the chemical dose still silently ravaging his nervous system. "You don't look like a mad doctor anymore," Adrian said, his eyes tracing the length of her body with naked possessiveness. "You look like a debt I'm not yet ready to pay." Lena didn't sit down. She stepped closer, her small hand reaching up to adjust the lapel of his shirt. "Your heart rate is still elevated. The drug hasn't fully cleared, Adrian. You should be resting instead of playing the gentleman." Adrian suddenly seized her wrist, yanking her hard so that Lena tumbled into his lap right there in the armchair. One of his arms locked around her waist while the other tangled into her soft hair, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. "Rule number 1 of this estate. Do not give me orders," he whispered, his hot breath smelling of expensive wine. "Rule number 2. When I look at you, you are not permitted to look away." "And rule number 3? Lena challenged, her chest heaving from the overwhelming proximity. "Rule number 3 is..." Adrian leaned down low, his lips grazing the shell of her ear, sending a jolt of electricity down Lena's spine. "Never forget that I could break you, yet I choose to keep you." He didn't kiss her, but his hand moved provocatively along her spine, feeling every vertebra beneath the thin silk. Lena found herself trembling, not from fear, but from a sinful craving beginning to kindle. She hated herself for allowing her body to respond to this killer. "Are you trying to control me through intimidation?" Lena gasped, her hands instinctively clutching his shoulders. "No," Adrian rasped, his eyes darkening. "I am controlling myself so I don't consume you right here. Your drug opened a floodgate, Lena. And now, I want much more than just pain." He released her as abruptly as he had pulled her in, leaving Lena standing there with ragged breath and a heart drumming like a war march. He picked up his wine glass, taking a calm sip as if nothing had happened, though the slight tremor in his hand betrayed him. "Eat. We have guests tonight, and I want them to know that you are the only thing in this house they are not allowed to lay eyes on." Chapter 7. The Soul's Mirror. Dinner was not the romantic affair its outward appearance suggested. After the business partners, men reeking of gunpowder and greed, had departed, the vast dining room held only Adrian and Lena beneath the dying flicker of candlelight. Adrian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring into the darkness swallowing the city, his hands still tracing the rim of an empty crystal glass. Lena stood to leave, but Adrian's voice cut through the air, halting her. It wasn't a growl or a threat, it was cold and precise, like a surgical strike. "You look at those men with such disdain, Lena. Do you truly believe you are superior to them simply because you hold a scalpel while they hold a gun?" Lena turned back, her chin lifted in a defiant tilt of pride. "At least I don't use my skills to strip a life away from money or power." Adrian pivoted, closing the distance between them with measured strides. The dim light cast jagged shadows across his angular face, transforming him into a literal demon in the flesh. He pinned her against the long mahogany table, his hands bracing against the wood, caging her within his reach. "Don't lie to me. I've read the files on your experiments in Boston. You didn't save those patients out of mercy. You pushed them to the very brink of death just to see if you were the one who could pull them back." He leaned in low, his ash-gray eyes boring into the darkest corners of Lena's soul. "You don't save people, Lena. You just love the feeling of playing God on the operating table. You crave the power to decide who lives, who dies, and how to rewrite a human being's nature. You and I, we are both power addicts. It's just that your heroin smells like antiseptic." Lena moved to slap him, but Adrian was faster. He snatched her wrist, forcing her palm against his left chest, where his heart was drumming with an abnormal rhythm ever since her dose had taken hold. "Look into the mirror, doctor," Adrian rasped, his breath tangling with hers. "That fascination in your eyes isn't because you want to cure me. You look at me like a perfect specimen that you have the sole right to mold. You love my cruelty because it gives you an excuse to be even more cruel under the guise of medicine." Lena felt her heart skip a beat. He had stripped away the mask of sanctity she had desperately clung to. The truth was naked and agonizing, like a deep laceration. She found herself trembling, not from fear of his violence, but from this cursed synchronization. "What do you know about me?" she whispered, though her eyes never wavered from his. "I know because I am your mirror," Adrian murmured, his lips grazing her trembling mouth, a tormenting tease. "Admit it, Lena, you aren't staying here because you're forced to. You're staying because in the world outside, no one allows you to be magnificently wicked the way you can be by my side." Adrian's grip on her wrist loosened, but instead of letting go, his fingers slid down, interlacing firmly with hers. Lena did not pull away. In the shadows of the dining room, two warped souls had truly seen one another. No more masks, no more lies. She realized then that she had truly fallen into this demon's hands, not because he had kidnapped her, but because he was the only one who understood the darkness within her. Chapter 8: The First Crack. That night, a storm swept through the city, hurling sheets of torrential rain against the estate's thick glass windows. Lena couldn't sleep. Adrian's words from the dining room remained lodged in her mind like shards of glass, aching and terrifyingly real. She left her bed, wandering aimlessly through the darkened hallways until a strange sound drew her toward the west wing, a strictly forbidden area. It was a choked, muffled groan, mingled with heavy, agonized breathing. Lena pushed the ajar door open. In the minimalist room, Adrian was no longer the arrogant sovereign. He was collapsed on the floor, his massive hands gripping the edge of the bed so hard his veins bulged in thick cords. On the floor lay a child, perhaps 7 years old, face pale from a high fever, seizing in his arms. "Adrian?" Lena gasped, her doctor's instinct overriding all fear. Adrian looked up at her. His ash-gray eyes, usually as cold as ice, were flooded with chaos and something that looked remarkably like helplessness. He didn't push her away. He looked at her as if she were the only lifebuoy in a vast ocean. "Save him. Lena, please." His voice was hoarse, shattered. It was the first time she had heard the word, "please," escape the mouth of this killer. Lena dropped to her knees beside them, checking the boy's pupils and respiratory rate. "He's in severe heat shock." "What did you do?" "I found him at the docks, in a human trafficker's container," Adrian said, his breath coming in ragged bursts, his hand trembling as it touched the boy's forehead. "I killed everyone there, but I don't know how to bring him back." Lena looked at Adrian's blood-stained hands, the blood of the monsters he had purged to save this small life. She realized something more terrifying than pain. Adrian was shaking. Not because of her drug, but because he was truly afraid that this child would die. For the next 2 hours, Lena used every skill she possessed to break the fever and stabilize the boy's heart rate. Adrian didn't move an inch. He stood there, motionless as a statue, watching her every move. Only when the child's breathing finally steadied into a peaceful sleep did Adrian stagger back, collapsing into a chair. Lena tucked the blanket around the boy and turned to look at Adrian. He was staring at his hands, hands that had just ended the lives of 10 men, yet had cradled a child like a fragile treasure. "You aren't as senseless as you think, Adrian," Lena whispered, stepping closer to wipe a streak of dried blood from the back of his hand with a warm cloth. Adrian didn't pull away. He looked up at her, his expression as lost as an abandoned child in the dark. "I destroyed everything to save him. Why does my chest feel like it's tightening like this? Is this the pain you spoke of?" Lena paused. She saw a genuine crack in his perfect facade. A crack that was bleeding, human, and deeply vulnerable. "No, Adrian," Lena said softly, her thumb instinctively brushing over his rough knuckles. "That isn't medical pain. That is compassion. And it hurts more than any needle of mine." For the first time, Adrian didn't look at her as a specimen or a rival. He took her hand, pulling her close, resting his forehead against her stomach as if seeking an anchor. Lena didn't push him away. Amidst the storm-ravaged night, in a room smelling of antiseptic and blood, she realized she had lost. She began to doubt her own prejudice against him. He wasn't a tumor to be excised, he was a soul desperate for salvation. And she, the one holding the scalpel, was starting to want to heal his heart instead of dissecting it. Chapter 8, Continued, Fractures and Redemption. Adrian remained in that position, his head resting against Lena, his broad shoulders trembling slightly. In the room, filled only with the steady breathing of the child, the boundary between predator and prey, between doctor and patient, seemed to dissolve entirely. "Don't look at me like that," Adrian rasped, yet he did not pull away. "Don't look at me as if I'm a man in need of pity." Lena ran her fingers through his thick hair, an action she herself couldn't explain. "I'm not pitying you, Adrian. I'm marveling. You just killed 10 men to save a child whose name you don't even know. That isn't the act of a senseless machine." Adrian lifted his head, his ash-gray eyes boring into hers, burning with a chaotic mixture of emotions. He stood abruptly, pinning her against the cold wall right beside the child's bed. "I saved him because he was a debt from the past, not out of kindness," he growled, his hot breath fanning across Lena's skin. "But you, what are you doing to me? Ever since you injected that drug, everything has turned upside down. I felt pain when he wasn't breathing. I feel suffocated when you touch me. You're poisoning me with this goddamn humanity. If it's poison, then you're the one who chose to drink it," Lena countered, her own breath quickening. She didn't back down, her hands rested on his bare chest, where his heart was beating as if it might explode. "You're afraid to feel, because when you feel, you're no longer invincible. You're afraid you'll become weak because of me." Adrian corked his lips, a smile full of danger and desire. "Weakness? Let me show you what real weakness feels like." He leaned down, and his kiss was anything but gentle. It carried the bitterness of wine, the scent of blood, and a frantic possessiveness. It was an assault on all of Lena's senses. She shuddered, her hands, which had intended to push him away, suddenly clung to his shoulders, pulling him closer. This contact was nothing like dry medical experiments. It was the collision of two solitary souls, two outcasts of the world finding each other in the dark. Adrian let out a low moan in his throat, his hands tightening around her waist as if trying to carve her into his own body. For the first time, he truly felt, not the pain of a needle, but the ache of an absolute craving. Suddenly, Adrian broke away. He looked at Lena, his face filled with a sudden horror as if he had just glimpsed the abyss. "Go," he gasped, his voice returning to its usual cold ruthlessness, though his eyes could not lie. "Before I forget why I need you alive." Lena looked at him, her lips still holding the warmth of his. She said nothing, merely gathering her medical tools in silence. As she stepped through the door, she paused, looking at Adrian's lonely silhouette beside the sleeping child. "You can't run forever, Adrian," she whispered. "The crack has opened, and the light will pour in, whether you want it to or not." Chapter 9, The Deadly Weakness. The faint light of dawn brought no salvation. It only exposed the cruel edges of the Volkov estate. Rumors that Adrian had decimated a human trafficking ring to save an anonymous child had spread like a bloodstain through the criminal underworld. His enemies found no humanity in that act, they only found a breach. Adrian sat in his study, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the mahogany desk. Before him lay a blood-soaked scrap of paper delivered to the estate gates. "The devil has learned to feel pain. And we know why. He's coming," Adrian said, not looking up as Lena entered the room. "Mikhail, he doesn't just want my territory, he wants to see me kneel for something, or someone." Lena set down her medical tray, her eyes dark with circles from a sleepless night. "Are you talking about the child, or about me?" Adrian stood, moving toward her. He no longer possessed the primal fervor of the night before, but a chilling stillness. He reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from her shoulder, his gaze fixed on the faint red mark on her neck, a trace of last night's kiss. "Both," Adrian whispered. "You are my cure, but you are also my death warrant." "Mikhail knows I've changed. He knows my heart is no longer an inanimate stone." "Then send me away," Lena challenged, even as her heart tightened. "Erase your weakness before he can touch it." Adrian laughed, a cold sound that echoed throughout the room. He abruptly spun Lena around, forcing her to look into the large gilded mirror behind them. "Look, Lena, what do you see?" I see a doctor who has lost her way, she replied, her voice trembling. No. I see a woman who has carved her name into the soul of a demon. Adrian tightened his grip on her waist, his face pressed against her neck. I cannot send you away, because you are the only one who makes me feel alive. But because of that, you are the ultimate target. At that exact moment, a massive explosion rocked the estate. The alarm system shrieked. The overhead lights flickered violently before cutting out completely, plunging the room into dense darkness. They're here, Adrian growled. He drew a handgun hidden beneath the desk, racking the slide with practiced ease. He shoved Lena toward the secret vault behind the bookshelf. Stay here. Do not come out until I return. If I don't come back, use the chemicals in the lab to free yourself. Do not let Mikhail take you. Adrian. Lena caught his sleeve. You don't feel pain, but you can die. Don't forget that. Adrian looked at her one last time, his ash-gray eyes glowing in the dark like a predator's. That is the price of the bargain, Doctor. I bartered with the devil to have you, and now I will make hell pay for touching you. The vault door slammed shut. Lena stood in the darkness, listening to the roar of gunfire from above. She realized then that the game of studying pain was over. The true war for survival had officially begun. Chapter 10. The Edge of Sensation. Inside the vault, the darkness was as thick as lead. Lena pressed her ear against the heavy steel door, feeling the violent tremors from explosions and the sharp crackle of gunfire above. Every sound felt like a blade piercing the artificial silence. She was no longer a scientist observing a specimen, she was a part of this nightmare. The gunfire grew sparse, replaced by heavy footsteps and the sound of metal dragging across the stone floor. Then, a suffocating, prolonged silence. Click. The vault door slowly creaked open. Lena recoiled, her hand tightening around a syringe filled with a potent sedative. But it wasn't Mikhail who stepped inside. It was Adrian. He stumbled forward, his breath hitching. His shirt was shredded and soaked in blood, not just the blood of his enemies. A bullet wound gaped deep in his left shoulder, and a long laceration slashed across his chest. Yet, Adrian showed no sign of agony. His eyes still burned with a chillingly cold frenzy. Adrian. Lena rushed to him, catching his massive frame before he could collapse. I told you, to stay put, Adrian rasped, a defiant smirk ghosting over his pale face. Mikhail is dead. He can't touch you anymore. Lena frantically tore away the remnants of his shirt to inspect the wounds. Blood surged relentlessly, staining her hands crimson. You're too badly hurt. Why aren't you feeling anything? My drug, it was supposed to work. Adrian seized her trembling hands, forcing them hard against the wound on his chest. It works, Lena. I feel heat. I feel a throbbing ache. But it wasn't enough to stop me from slaughtering them all. He suddenly pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. In the looming shadow of death, his usual arrogance vanished, leaving only a raw sincerity. Listen, Doctor, I've always wanted to know what pain is. And now I do. He looked deep into her eyes, his ash-gray gaze now clouded from blood loss. The greatest pain isn't this bullet. It's the thought that if I fall, you'll have to face this world alone. Stop talking. Lena choked out, her tears falling to mingle with the blood on his chest. I'm going to save you. I'm the god of the operating table, remember? I don't give you permission to die. Then do it, Adrian whispered, his hand weakly caressing her cheek. Make me hurt a little more. Let me know I'm still alive, in your hands. Lena took a deep breath, suppressing her terror. She guided him toward the sterile laboratory, where it had all begun. Amidst the ruins of the battle, under the dim, flickering remnants of the lights, she began the most important surgery of her life. Not for research, not to satisfy a mad curiosity, but to preserve the only soul that had ever truly seen through her darkness. As the needle pierced his flesh, Adrian let out a low groan. It was the sound of life. And in that moment, Lena realized a cruel truth. She had saved him, but he had also saved her from the numbness of a solitary genius. The devil's game had ended, but a different symphony of pain and love had only just begun.